Conjures were nerfed hard, but this actually turned out to be great for Revolution. We now have a lot more adrenaline to work with, allowing us to create more unique and interesting combos. I've updated the bars from my previous video and included some new methods like full AFK rasial and no food hard mode of vorkath. To turn on Revolution, go to Settings, Gameplay, Combat and Action Bar, and then Combat Mode. You'll see a bunch of different options there. Select the box that says Revolution. Next, you're going to scroll down and set Revolution to trigger Basic, Threshold, and Ultimate abilities. Basically, this means Revolution is going to trigger every ability on your bar. If you want to learn Manual later, you can turn off Ultimate and Threshold abilities and manually activate them using a keybind. To set the number of action bar slots you want Revolution to trigger, use the slider right above this section. Let's say, for example, I have an action bar that uses 5 abilities. You'll want to set that slider to 5. Finally, scroll down once more and turn on the checkbox for Necromancy. This will cause you to fire the basic auto attack whenever your Revolution bar runs out of abilities to use. I've put together a quick summary of every ability I use in this guide. If you're curious why I'm using an ability or what it does, you can refer back to this section to learn more about it. First, we have our basic abilities. They're used to gain adrenaline and space out thresholds. Then we have our conjures. We got the ghost for healing, the skeleton for single target DPS, and the zombie for AoE DPS. After that, we have threshold attacks. These are higher hitting abilities, but for Necromancy, they don't have any cooldowns, which makes them hard to build into rotations, but I figured that all out for you. Then we have our ultimate abilities. This is really just Living Death and Death Skulls for Necromancy. If you get the Zut Cape, it powers up Death Skulls and makes it a really strong ability, but if you don't have it, that's alright. I also have Revo bars that'll work for you. Levels 1 to 60 are very similar to before the Conjure changes. At level 1, we only have one ability, the Necromancy basic attack. Because we've turned on the auto trigger for this, our Revolution bar is actually completely empty. But don't worry, when you attack a target, your character will keep attacking with strong attacks and you level up really fast. For levels 2 to 39, I'll use the exact same action bars from my previous video. I'll link it in the description if you'd like a more in-depth explanation of these bars. At level 2, we'll put the skeleton conjure on our bar. It's worth noting that ectoplasm, which is required to summon the skeletal warrior conjure, is somewhat expensive, so it may be worth excluding it at lower levels to save some GP if you're a main, or time if you're an Iron Man. At level 8, we're going to add the Finger of Death ability to our bar. This is a strong hitting threshold attack which consumes adrenaline. At level 13, we gain the Touch of Death ability. This ability gives us 4 necrosis stacks every time it's cast. Necrosis stacks work with Finger of Death to reduce its adrenaline cost. We put it at the front of the bar to get as many necrosis stacks as possible. Then at level 20, we unlock the Skeleton Command. This is an attack which makes the skeleton attack multiple times really fast, dealing a lot of damage. It's a strong hitting ability, so we move it to the front of our bar. At level 28, we unlock the Death Skulls ability. If you manually cast Finger of Death, then use the bar Skeleton Touch Skulls. Otherwise, just keep your action bar exactly the same. Then at level 36, we unlock our first Area of Effect or AoE ability. This is Blood Siphon. It causes you to siphon life points from every monster around you, healing you, and then dealing a big hit to your primary target. If you're attacking multiple enemies at once, then you're going to want to use the bar Siphon, Skeleton, Touch, and Finger. If you manually cast Finger of Death every time you have 6 necrosis stacks, then you can put Death Skulls at the end of the bar instead of Finger of Death. At level 40, we finally get some more conjures, the Ghost and the Zombie. Both of them can be unlocked by heading to the Well of Souls and buying them with talent points. The Ghost is really good for any sort of single target situation where you need extra healing, so stuff like God War's Dungeon or higher level bosses. Basically every hit it does heals you and deals a small amount of damage to your target. Also at level 60 it can be powered up to make other abilities hit up to 10% more. The Zombie does more damage than the Ghost but less than the Skeleton. It also deals passive AoE poison damage, but this poison does not actually increase experience when training, which limits its utility early on. Later on, it can be commanded to explode, which is really helpful for AoE damage. We'll add the Ghost to both our single target and multi-target bars, and then the Zombie to our single target bar. You can include the Zombie in the AoE bar, but I'm going to exclude it as it may reduce your Necromancy XP per hour. Our single target bar will be skeleton, touch, zombie, ghost, and finger. If you want to reduce the ectoplasm cost, then use only the skeleton and add the ghost if you need that additional healing. Our multi-target bar will be siphon, skeleton, touch, ghost, finger. At level 48, we unlock the bloat ability. This ability is extremely strong on monsters that take a long time to kill, but it's hard to work into revolution bars because it gets cast repeatedly without a cooldown. It also does moderate AoE damage to targets. Our single target bar will be skeleton, touch, zombie, ghost, finger, and bloat. Our multi-target bar will be siphon, skeleton, touch, ghost, finger, and bloat. These bars ensure that Finger of Death is never cast using 60 adrenaline, but that also means you'll never have over 60 adrenaline while using these bars. The Ghost and Siphon healing should be plenty to sustain you in most training spots. At level 54, we unlock the Soul Sap and Soul Strike abilities. Soul Sap gives souls, which are indicated by blue dots over your head. It's the second Necromancy basic ability, which is a huge help for Revolution bars because we can use it to gain more adrenaline between thresholds. Soul Strike hurls one of the souls you've collected at an enemy and hits surrounding targets. It's now your best AoE ability. Our single target bar will be Skeleton, Touch, Zombie, Ghost, Finger, Bloat, Soul Strike, Soul Sap. Our multi-target bar will be Soul Sap, Death Skulls, Soul Strike, Skeleton, Touch of Death, Ghost, Finger, and finally Bloat. You may need to adjust this bar slightly depending on what you're killing. I've also excluded the zombie due to the poison damage. If you need a better healing AoE bar, then add Siphon to the front of this. The single target bar should heal you well with the ghost, but you can move it closer to the front of the bar for slightly increased healing. At level 60, you should go get 8.5k souls in the Vessel of Souls, or at the very least 4.5k souls. Then unlock the Spirit Pact 1 talent for longer conjures and Spectral Scythe 1 and Command Zombie for AoE damage. Then get Command Ghost for increased single target damage and healing. You may not want to unlock the Ghost or Zombie commands depending on how you're training, because the command ability is linked directly to the Conjure ability. That means after you cast the Conjure, it will turn into command on your revo bar and always cast. For the zombie, that means it will explode when executing a revo bar instead of persisting. For the ghost, that means you may waste a global cooldown powering it up for minimal added benefit when training in AoE spots, where all you need is the base healing. I would generally recommend everyone unlock the commands, but want to make this distinction before you unlock them, as you won't be able to work around this until level 99. After getting the soul requirement from rituals, you should be at least level 66, which unlocks the Volley of Souls ability. It's one of the best abilities for single target DPS. It allows you to hurl up to 3 souls from Soul Sap at the enemy at once, dealing 150% ability damage each. At level 95 with the Soulbound Lantern, that number increases to 5 souls, but you won't frequently hit 5 souls using revo bars. For our AoE bar, we're going to use the Zombie Conjure at the front of the bars with the command ability unlocked. The zombie will explode, dealing 400% ability damage to all nearby enemies. This reduces the amount of time it deals poison damage, which increases Necromancy XP per hour. After the zombie, we'll use Death Skulls, Soul Strike, Soul Sap, Spectral Scythe, Skeleton, Ghost, Touch of Death, Finger of Death, and Bloat. If the abilities at the end of the bar don't execute, that's completely fine. It'll depend on where you're training. If you want to save on ectoplasm, you can remove the skeleton and ghost. If you need additional healing, then add a blood siphon after Spectral Scythe and move ghost right after that. Our single target DPS bar will be Ghost, Skeleton, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Finger of Death, Bloat, Volley of Souls, Zombie. At level 70, unlock the second cast of Scythe and Spirit Pact 2. We'll keep our single target and multi-target bars the same, just make sure you buy those upgrades. At level 76, you unlock the Living Death ability. I'm going to design bars with the Zut cape at this point, but if you don't have one, don't worry, I'll still provide options for no cape. Now that conjures consume no adrenaline, Living Death is great to include on ability bars in combination with the Zut cape. It allows you to cast Death Skulls every 12 seconds and increases the damage of Finger of Death by 50%. It also boosts the adrenaline gain of Touch of Death. You want to have the Zut cape, the passive Ring of Vigor, and the Conservation of Energy relic for the bars to work best. You'll also want the Fury of the Smalls relic and Impatient 4 on your armor. These aren't hard requirements, but they will improve DPS noticeably. For single target combat, use the rotation Death Skulls, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Skeleton, Ghost, Volley of Souls, Living Death, Zombie, Finger of Death. If you only need burst damage, then use the rotation Death Skulls, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Skeleton, Ghost, Volley of Souls, Living Death, Sacrifice, Finger of Death. If you don't have the Zut Cape unlocked, then stick with the rotation Ghost, Skeleton, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Finger of Death, Bloat, Volley of Souls, Zombie. The AoE bar will be unchanged. At level 80, unlock the third cast of Spectral Scythe and Spirit Pact 3. The third cast of Scythe is huge for AoE DPS, but it will shake up your bar. A good generic AoE bar at this point is Zombie, Scythe, Soul Strike, Soul Sap, Touch of Death. If you need extra healing, start by removing Zombie from the bar. If that's not enough, then add the Ghost and or Siphon to the end of the bar. If you have the Zut Cape, then use the bar Zombie, Death Skulls, Soul Strike, Soul Sap, Scythe, Touch of Death. If you find yourself capping out above 100% adrenaline frequently, then use the non-Zut Cape AoE bar instead. The level 80 bars will last you well all the way to level 99. I'd suggest training on bound skeletons or ravenous ghouls until about 85 or 90 necromancy, and then swap to abyssal beasts to finish off 99. I have an in-depth guide for beasts that I'll include in the description. At level 99, we unlock the Command Undead Army ability. The ability is customizable and allows you to summon up to 4 conjures with a single cast. Currently, we'll fill the ability with Skeleton, Ghost, and Zombie as those are our only options, but if new conjures are released in the future, they may be worth using instead. The only downside to the ability is that it costs twice as much ectoplasm to conjure spirits, so if you're an Iron Man or low on funds, it may be best to use it only for high-level PvM. At this point, you should be able to unlock the Zut Cape using Necromancy if you haven't already. I'd strongly encourage you to try. I know there are a few decent guides out there already, but I can put together a Zut guide to get you that first kill. Let me know in the comments if you'd like that. If you don't have the cape, then our single target action bar will change slightly to account for the Command Undead Army ability. Instead of summoning each spirit one by one, we'll summon them as a group at the start. Next, we'll command the Ghost, followed by the Skeleton, then use Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Finger of Death, Bloat, and Volley of Souls. We'll no longer explode the Zombie and let it deal its consistent DPS instead. If you want a bar that gives more adrenaline, then use the rotation Command Undead Army, Ghost, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Skeleton, Death Skulls, Living Death, Volley of Souls, Sacrifice, and Finger of Death. You can also optionally add Tuska's Wrath right after Sacrifice. After you get the Zut Cape, there are a few other upgrades available. These are the Tier 95 Robes, the Tier 95 Guard, and the Tier 95 Lantern. If you're manually doing combat, the upgrade order is the Lantern, then 2 robe pieces, then 2 more robe pieces, then the Guard, and then that final robe piece. However, for full Revolution, this is not the case. Instead, you'll want to start with 2 robe pieces, then get 2 more robe pieces, then the Guard, then the Lantern, and finally that last robe piece. The Lantern only adds about 5 to 10k extra damage per minute versus 30 to 40k with the robes, even with bars designed to gain 5 souls. The Guard is more up for debate, but it's cheaper and it improves accuracy as well as damage, so I'd get it first and possibly swap to the Lantern later if you start using manual more. If you're doing AoE training, the Guard is much better. I didn't find any significant changes between bars for Tier 90 versus Tier 95 robes, but I do have some differences if you have the Lantern. If you don't have the Lantern, your primary DPS bar will be Death Skulls, Soul Sap, Command Undead Army, Skeleton, Touch of Death, Ghost, Living Death, Volley of Souls, Tuska's Wrath, and Finger of Death. If you do have the Tier 95 Lantern, then use the bar Command Undead Army, Death Skulls, Ghost, Soul Sap, Skeleton, Touch of Death, Living Death, Sacrifice, Tuska's Wrath, Volley of Souls, and Finger of Death. This bar has really good burst damage, so we'll also use it as our burst DPS bar for monsters with about 400k hit points or lower when using the 3 Soul Lantern. The non-Zut Cape higher adrenaline bar also works well with the 3 Soul Lantern, but the primary bar I have is more consistent damage when you get unlucky impatient procs. You can optionally add Divert to the end of the bars to help with that situation. Next, I have a few defensive bars you can use.
These perform well regardless of what equipment you're using. Make sure to use lesser bone shield when using these bars so you aren't burning through runes. First, we have the Reflect bar. That will be Death Skulls, Soul Sap, Command Undead Army, Skeleton, Ghost, Touch of Death, Living Death, Volley of Souls, Sacrifice, Reflect, and Finger of Death. This bar helps reduce some damage while also dealing damage back and prevents excessive use of Finger of Death, which is good for adrenaline management. You can replace Reflect with Debilitate if you want, or add Debilitate after Reflect. Next, we have the Devotion bar. This bar deals outstanding DPS while also triggering Devotion every minute. The rotation is Command Undead Army, Death Skulls, Ghost, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Skeleton, Living Death, Tuska's Wrath, Volley of Souls, Devotion, and Finger of Death. Then finally we have the Tank bar, which is Command Undead Army, Death Skulls, Ghost, Soul Sap, Touch of Death, Skeleton, Living Death, Divert, Reflect, Volley of Souls, Devotion, Debilitate, Finger of Death. I was able to no food hard mode vorkath using this bar. If you're using Soul Split, you can remove Devotion and optionally add in Sacrifice. You can also manually cast your tier 90 guard spec with this bar to increase DPS. It's possible to take defensive bars even farther by including abilities such as Barricade and Immortality, but I found this bar was a good balance of damage reduction and DPS. At this point, we have a few different options for AoE bars. I don't recommend using Command Undead Army for training because it costs so much, but it does increase XP per hour slightly. If you don't have the Zut Cape, I'd use the bar Command Undead Army, Zombie, Soul Strike, Scythe, Soul Sap, Touch of Death. You can swap Scythe and Soul Strike depending on what you're fighting, but it doesn't really make a huge difference either way. If you have the Zut Cape, I'd use the bar Command Undead Army, Zombie, Death Skulls, Soul Strike, Soul Sap, Scythe, Touch of Death. Again though, Command Undead Army adds very little additional benefit for a high cost, so you're better off leaving it off unless you need the ghost healing. That's the end of the generic bars. Next, I'll get into method-specific bars. First off, we have updated training bars for Armored Phantoms and Abyssal Beasts. I'll be honest, I have not done another 50 hours testing here at these two spots, but I did spend some time there and found that the two AoE bars I just went over work well at Abyssal Beasts, but at Phantoms they hardly make any difference. In fact, it's probably better to exclude conjures entirely at Armored Phantoms, but you can use Command Undead Army if you need some extra healing. Next, we have the God Wars Dungeon 2 bars. If you reset each kill, then using the burst bars from earlier will do great, but if you want to do extended AFK trips, then I suggest using a variation of these AFK bars from the PVME Discord. I played around with them and they're pretty good, but the exact order depends a little bit on what gear you're using. For Greg and Vindicta, standard DPS gear is fine, but for twins you'll want to use 3 pieces of Crypt with Animate Dead, and for Hellweir, you'll want to use some Death Warden to survive unlucky mushroom spawns. Then we have AFK Rasial. These bars are courtesy of No Poet on Discord. I helped him with some of the survival strats, but he cooked the bars, so full credit to him. You'll need full Crypt Bloom with Animate Dead and Crystal Shield 4, Absorbative 4, and Undead Slayer, along with generic DPS perks. You'll want a Blood Reaver with its auto fire rate set to 9 or 10, the Zut Cape, Salve Amulet, and a Ring of Death. Then in your inventory, you'll need Portents, Overloads, Penance Powder, and Runes. For relics, use Conservation of Energy, Death Ward, and Fury of the Smalls. You'll also want to use the Vampirism Aura. After that, head into an instance and position yourself against the wall, summon your army, cast Invoke Death, and then AFK until the end of the kill. The bar you'll use is Death Skulls, Touch of Death, Conjure Undead Army, Ghost, Skeleton, Living Death, Soul Sap, Resonance, Natural Instinct, Reflect, Preparation, Volley of Souls, and Finger of Death. After Raziel dies, reset in War's Retreat and go again. The entire kill will be AFK if you have the exact setup, but if you don't have everything, there's a chance you'll die if you go full AFK. Even then, this will be much lower effort compared to any other methods currently out there. Then we have hard mode vorkath. You'll need to avoid the spike attack and pools and shoot down vorkath during the kill, so you can't AFK, but revo will take care of basically everything else for you. I found using tier 95 robes and the tank bar from earlier worked really well at the boss, but If you're still taking too much damage, you can adapt the same AFK rasial bars and use Grip Bloom instead. I also used a Reaver instead of a Hellhound and had to heal it periodically so it wouldn't die. Finally, I have a bar for transitioning to full manual. Revolution is really powerful, but at the end of the day, casting abilities yourself will take your DPS to the next level. I suggest using the bar Command Undead Army, Ghost, Skeleton, Soul Sap, and Touch of Death as a gateway to get there. It will deal with all your conjure summoning, build adrenaline from basics, and allow you to choose when to launch Death Skulls, Volley of Souls, Finger of Death, and whatever else you want.